For millions of people in the US, filing taxes means using a special number called an ITN. Now, the government makes a promise that the personal info tied to this number is private. But there are also these legal backdoors that really put that promise to the test. So that's what we're going to dig into right here, this fundamental conflict between the promise of ITN privacy and the very real peril of its exceptions. This quote from a former national taxpayer advocate, wow, it really nails the heart of the issue. It's all about this incredible tightrope the IRS has to walk. See, on one side, they absolutely need people's trust to get them to file their taxes. But on the other, how far does that trust really go? That's the core question we're digging into. Okay, so to really get a handle on this whole privacy thing, we first got to understand the deal that's at the heart of the entire ITIN program. You could call it the taxpayer's bargain. So what exactly is an ITIN? Well, it's this 9-digit number the IRS created way back in 1996. And the idea was pretty simple, really. They needed a way for people to follow US tax laws, even if they couldn't get a Social Security number. So at its core, you got to remember it's just a tool, purely for tax collection, period. And this is super important. You have to get what an ITIN isn't. The IRS is crystal clear on this stuff. It's not a work permit, it has nothing to do with Social Security benefits, and it absolutely does not change your immigration status. Its one and only job is to connect a person to their tax return. So, okay, that leads to a pretty obvious question, right? Why go through all this hassle? Why create a whole separate system just for processing taxes? And yeah, you probably guessed it, the answer comes down to money. And we're not talking small change here. Take 2019, for example. In just that 1 year, ITIN filers kicked in a net of $5.8 billion. Billion with a B. So this isn't some niche program. We're talking about a major source of revenue. But see, for a system like this to actually work, people have to trust it. They need to feel safe. And that's where the whole promise of privacy comes into play. So, to get people to comply, the government makes this big promise of confidentiality. And this isn't some informal, trust me kind of deal. No way. It's literally written into the law, right there in the US tax code. All right, so the legal backbone of this whole promise is one specific law, Internal Revenue Code Section 6103. You can think of it like a giant legal shield. It lays down a very firm rule. The IRS is generally forbidden from sharing your tax information with other government agencies. It's designed to be this impenetrable vault. And look, this isn't just some abstract legal theory. The IRS itself knows just how critical this is. A former IRS commissioner said it himself. Sharing this data would have a chilling effect on getting people to pay their taxes. It's simple, right? If people get scared that their info will be used against them, they're just not going to file. And boom, the whole bargain falls apart. But here's where things get really interesting. Because the very same law that builds this massive privacy shield, well, it also builds in some very specific, very legal cracks. And that right there is the pivot point for this whole discussion. If Section 6103 is the promise, is that promise really absolute? Is this information ever truly 100% confidential? The short answer, nope, not at all. So let's get into the weeds a little bit. Section 6103 has several major exceptions. For example, the IRS has to share info for tax administration stuff with agencies like TIGTA. That's the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. Now, for non-tax criminal cases, another federal agency can get access. But, and this is a big but, they need a court order. The law also carves out exceptions for enforcing tax laws, helping states with their tax laws, and even for fighting terrorism. Each one is a specific legally defined backdoor. And this right here, this is the core conflict we've been talking about. The The law creates this super strong rule of confidentiality, but in the very same breath, it builds in these specific backdoors. It's basically a promise with a big old asterisk next to it. A shield that was designed from the start with a few cracks in it. Right, so the really crucial thing to get is that these exceptions aren't just sitting in a law book somewhere gathering dust. They have absolutely been used in the real world, and in ways that directly challenge that whole privacy promise made to ITIN holders. Let's just walk through a quick timeline here. The program starts in '96. Fast forward to 2003, and this is where we see the peril side of things come to life. An agent from TIGTA, remember the tax watchdog, used IRS data to go after 2 ITIN holders for a non-tax crime. That was a textbook example of one of those exceptions in action. Then, more recently, an agreement was set up so that starting in 2025, the Treasury Department will share tax info with ICE for certain criminal investigations. So you can really see the progression here, from what seemed like an isolated case to a more formal, systematic way of sharing data. Okay, so let's pull all of this together. What does this all really mean for ITIN privacy today? Let's break it down. The bottom line is this. ITIN privacy is protected by a really powerful rule, for sure. But it is not an absolute guarantee. The whole system is this incredibly fragile, legally defined balancing act between the government's need to collect taxes and its need to enforce other laws. You know, former IRS chief counsel really put the stakes into perspective in a pretty visceral way. He said, we ask people to strip basically naked for their government when they file taxes. His whole point was, are people going to be willing to be that vulnerable if they think the IRS is just going to pass around their information to everyone else? It's a really powerful way to frame the kind of trust that's on the line here. And all this leaves us with a really critical question for the future. In an age where data sharing between government agencies is easier than ever, how can this fundamental bargain, compliance in exchange for confidentiality, actually be preserved? And that is the tightrope walk that's going to continue to define both the promise and the peril of the ITIN.